After a one-night mistake, Millionaire swaps bodies with a poor girl and ends up pregnant. They said he couldn't be touched, that every time a woman came close, his skin burned. So he built walls of silence, of routine, of numbers. But then she walked in, and not elegant, not invited, not even the right girl. She wasn't supposed to be there. But somehow, she saw him. And he, the man who couldn't stand to be near anyone, suddenly couldn't bear to let her go. One touched him. Colin Whitmore lived like no one else could reach him. Not because he hated people, but because every time someone came close, his body rebelled. Traumas, hives, panic, collapse. The doctor said it was rare. Colin knew better. He wasn't allergic to women. He was allergic to being known. 32. Billionaire. Obsessive. He ran Whitmore Dynamics like a god who didn't believe in heaven. Everything in his life was even. 12 books on the shelf, 4 keys in his pocket. All things measured, contained, controlled. That was a mess he never opened. And then came the contract. Henrietta, his sharp-tongued, slowly fading grandmother, made one final demand. To meet them. That's all I'm asking. Let me go knowing someone will love you, even if it's a lie. So he agreed. Unstaged girlfriend interview. 6 hand-picked candidates. 30 minutes of corporate-level charm. Until the elevator opened. And in walked someone who was never supposed to be there. Isla Merrick didn't belong in a boardroom. She belonged on rooftops with a paintbrush. And in bookstores that smelled like ink and longing. She had the wrong shoes. The wrong resume. The wrong name. But the moment Callum saw her, something in his chest shifted. She wasn't rehearsed. Wasn't desperate. She looked at him like he wasn't made of money, but of silence. "Why do you want this job?" he asked. "I don't," she said. "Then why are you here?" She hesitated. "Because my mother's dying, and I've run out of ways to keep her alive." There it was. Truth. Unguarded, undressed. He didn't need another lie. And so he offered her one. "You start tonight." The contract was simple. No touching. No questions. No personal history. Appearances only. She signed it with hands that shook. He watched her with eyes that never did. It was just an act. It's a mask. But the thing about masks is this. They slip. Especially when someone finally sees the face beneath. That night, Isla stepped into Callum's penthouse. It wasn't a home. It was a vault. No color, no noise, no softness. Only order. She unpacked slowly, a toothbrush, a sketch pad, a worn photo of her mother. But she didn't speak. He stood in the doorway. "Our rules," he said. "Okay. I don't touch me." She met his gaze and whispered. "I wasn't planning to. But life doesn't always care about plans. Grief has its own timing. And so does love." And in the silence between them, something began to bloom. Something that couldn't be measured. Or contained. Or denied. Chapter 1. The Wrong Girl. If she hadn't hit the wrong elevator button, none of it would have happened. Isla Merrick was late again. She had spilled coffee on her second-hand jeans, lost the strap to her knockoff tote, and barely scraped enough tips last night to cover the subway fare into Manhattan. But here she was, breathless and hopeful, clutching a flimsy resume that smelled like peppermint gum and rain. She thought she was going to an interview for an entry-level live-stream assistant. Whitmore Dynamics had posted the ad on a freelancer board. Temporary creative position, minimum experience required. But instead of a row of art directors or brand reps, she walked into a glass conference room filled with high heels, perfume, and silence. At the head of the table sat him, Colin Whitmore. He didn't look up when she entered. didn't greet her. I didn't blink. The air felt filtered, sterilized. He was all steel edges and expensive detachment. Black suit, silver watch, no tie. Every item on the table in front of him had been arranged in pairs. 2 water bottles, 2 pens, 2 white gloves. Isla took a slow breath. Something felt very, very wrong. Then someone said her name, or what they thought her name was. "Miss Merrick, you're number 6. And she sat down, because the doors were closing behind her. Because walking out meant giving up. Because she needed the money. Because maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of chaos her life was always made of. "Why do you want to be my girlfriend?" he asked. Isla blinked. Wait, girlfriend? What kind of position was this? She looked around. The other women wore designer dresses, glossy blowouts. They didn't look confused. They looked prepared. A blonde 2 seats down leaned forward and smiled at Callum like he was dessert. "I've followed your work for years," she purred. "Your algorithms revolutionize brand engagement. I believe I could be the partner your image needs." Callum didn't even nod. Next. The brunette beside her tried next. "I have etiquette training, 4 million followers, and I'm very discreet." Again, nothing. It was Isla's turn. She hadn't moved, and she was still dripping from the rain. Callum turned to her, voice steady. "Are you?" She exhaled. This wasn't her fight, wasn't her league, wasn't her day. But her heart beat anyway, so she answered, "I don't want to be your girlfriend." Every woman in the room turned to look at her. Even the older woman at the corner, the one with silver hair and laughing eyes, raised a brow. But Callum, he just stared. "Are you here?" Isla held his gaze. "Because I need a miracle. My mom's in a hospital bed 2 boroughs away, and I've got $4 in my bank account, and a last chance that looks like this one." I silence. "No, I don't want to date you. I just want to stop losing things I love." Henrietta Whitmore smiled faintly. Callum didn't. But he stood up. "You start tonight." The contract was slid across the table like a dare. On signature, $50,000 a month. Rules, conditions, lines not to be crossed. 24-hour companionship. In requirement. No unauthorized touching. Complete secrecy. Isla stared at the page. This wasn't a job. It was a performance. But what do you do when the price of saying no is losing the only person who's ever mattered? You pick up the pen. That night, she walked into his penthouse. It wasn't a home. It was a showroom. Not a single photo on the walls. Not a fingerprint on the surfaces. Not even dust, as if dust feared him too. Her room was down the hall from his. Sterile, silent, too white to feel safe. She unpacked her sketchbook, her pencil case, a tiny framed picture of her mom from before the cancer. Then came the knock. Callum didn't enter. He stood outside the door like a sentence waiting to end. "Our rules," he said. She opened the door wider. "Okay. Don't enter the West Wing, don't speak to the staff unless spoken to, and don't change anything." He paused. "Above all else, don't touch me?" She blinked. "You have a medical condition?" "Something like that." "Got it." He looked at her, really looked, for the first time. "Why did you say yes?" And she swallowed. "'Cause people don't get saved when they deserve it. They get saved when someone sees them drowning." You think I'll save you?" "No," she said, "but I think I'll save someone, and that might be enough." He left, and Isla Merrick stood in a stranger's world, pretending to be someone she wasn't, under a name she hadn't chosen. But as the city flickered outside the window like stars that didn't know how to quit, she let herself hope. Not for the contract. Not for the paycheck. but for the man with the sad eyes and the gloves he wished he didn't need. Chapter 2. A House That Isn't Home. Callum didn't sleep in his bed. Isla realized it that first night, even though she never saw him leave it. She heard the shower go on at 4 a.m. sharp. He made no sound walking the hall. There were no yawns, no groans, no sighs. Only motion, mechanical, like the tick of a grandfather clock, precise and eternal. She pressed her palm to the cool glass of her window and swore outside. Her mom was sleeping under thin sheets in a fluorescent room, waiting for surgery Isla couldn't afford. Here, she was surrounded by mahogany furniture and digitally tinted art worth more than her college tuition. It wasn't a home. It was a museum built by a man who didn't know how to live inside it. At breakfast, Callum sat at the head of a 10-foot table. He didn't look up when she walked in. She sat at the far end, trying not to notice that even the utensils were aligned by size. "The eggs are cold," he said. She blinked. "Sorry. You're late." "It's 7:01. But she tried not to laugh. He didn't smile. Instead, he set down his fork and adjusted his napkin, as if peace depended on corners lining up. "I'll eat in my room next time," she offered. He looked at her then, not cruelly, just clinically. "No, that would look suspicious. My grandmother expects us to dine together." "Right, of course." She stirred her coffee. "Do I say things to her about you? Like, pretend stories?" He paused, then stood. "Don't lie. Just don't tell her everything." But then he left. She met Henrietta Whitmore the next day. The older woman was smaller than Isla imagined, all silver curls and knowing eyes, wrapped in a cashmere shawl and mischief. "So you're the one who made my grandson blink," Henrietta whispered with a grin. I didn't mean to." "That's exactly why it worked." Henrietta didn't ask many questions. She just held Isla's hand, the only one who had touched her since she arrived. "We've not cold, you know, just frozen. Something stopped in him a long time ago." "What happened to him?" "We won't say, so I stopped asking." They sat together in the garden for an hour. Henrietta spoke about love like it was a kind of weather, sometimes brutal, sometimes healing. "Promise me this, dear," she said. "Don't pretend to love him. Let him learn what it means for real." Back inside, Callum was on a call with his board. Isla passed through the corridor quietly, but his voice carried like thunder and marble. "No, Gregory. We don't compromise just because Europe wants color packaging. Symmetry matters. Flow matters." She stood behind the pillar, watching the way he moved, like every gesture hurt a little. But then he saw her. "Do you need something?" "I was just listening." "Alone?" Vivi asked. "Bleeding." A strange thing happened then. He didn't bark, didn't retreat. He just nodded. "You shouldn't walk barefoot on tile," he said, eyes flicking to her feet. "You shouldn't live alone in a place where your voice echoes like it's apologizing." He didn't respond, but something in his shoulders loosened. That night, she left a sketch on the kitchen counter. A small charcoal drawing of Henrietta and Callum, back when he was young, laughing. She didn't sign it. She just left it beneath his napkin. The next morning, he didn't say a word. But the napkin remained untouched. 1 week in, she began memorizing the patterns. Callum had a thing for even numbers. He turned doorknobs twice, tapped his watch 4 times before each meeting. And every night he drank chamomile tea at exactly 9:00 p.m., but never finished the cup. It was like he lived in parentheses, never starting, never ending. Trapped in rituals that numbed the spaces in between. "Did someone hurt you?" she asked one evening, standing across from him at the balcony. He didn't answer. "It's okay. You don't have to tell me." "Then why did you ask?" Because I want to understand why you're always bracing for touch like it's fire. His jaw clenched, because it was. A beat passed. He turned away. My mother died when I was 9. My father remarried 3 months later. The woman who replaced her wasn't cruel, not exactly, just absent. Cold, and I think, over time, I learned to be more like her than myself. Isla didn't say anything. She didn't try to fix him. And she just stood there, steady, real, present. And that night, for the first time, Callum drank the entire cup of tea. The next morning, Henrietta looked at them both with quiet joy. I want a wedding. Isla dropped her spoon. A wedding? A simple one, just a ceremony. I want to see you two promise each other something real. Callum stared at his grandmother, then at Isla. That's not necessary, he said. By me it is. Henrietta, before I go, she whispered, let me see you walk towards something instead of away from it. The room went silent, and Callum nodded. Tomorrow, he said. We'll do it tomorrow. Isla didn't sleep that night. She sat curled up on the window bench, watching the lights flicker on the skyline. This wasn't real, but it felt like it could be. Maybe not forever, but enough to remember. Enough to change something inside both of them. Enough to matter. Chapter 3. The Wedding We Never Meant. The sun rose gently, as if it too knew that what was about to happen wasn't quite true but wasn't quite false either. Isla stood in front of the mirror, wearing a cream-colored dress borrowed from Henrietta's attic. It wasn't white, not exactly, more like the color of something left in sunlight too long, like innocence that had learned how to survive. Her hands shook as she adjusted the lace sleeves. It wasn't a real wedding. She reminded herself again and again. But the way her stomach fluttered, the way her chest tightened. She hadn't dressed like a bride since she was little, playing pretend in her mom's old curtains. Today, it didn't feel like a game. It felt like walking toward a promise she wasn't allowed to keep. Downstairs, Callum waited in a navy suit. He didn't look up when she entered. He rarely did. But when he finally did, slowly, almost reluctantly, he froze. Not the usual kind of freeze. Not the clinical, armored kind. Something in his gaze caught. Wavered. Held. Henrietta clapped her hands from her seat by the garden window. Good heavens, look at you two. If I didn't know better, I'd think I was witnessing love. Isla tried to smile. Callum didn't even try. He just offered his arm. Shall we? She looped her arm through his, stiff, unsure. His body tensed at first. Then, it didn't. If Ember knew anything, it was that Bella read the comfort of a hotel. Just for a moment. The ceremony was simple. Just Henrietta, the notary, and 2 housekeepers who pretended to busy themselves with vases. No vows, no audience, no music. But when the officiant asked if they had anything to say, Isla turned toward him and found herself speaking words she didn't know were inside her. You're not what I expected, she whispered, and maybe I'm not what you wanted, but in this house full of rules, you gave me a place, a reason. Even if it's borrowed, it matters to me. She swallowed. Well, thank you for not turning away when I was the wrong girl. Callum didn't speak for a long time. Then his voice, quiet as wind. I don't remember what it feels like to need someone. Until now. The notary pronounced them husband and wife. There was no kiss. Just Callum's hand hovering near hers, then settling beside it on the bench. They sat in the garden afterward, while Henrietta sipped lemon water and beamed like she was watching the ocean. This is the happiest day I've had in years, she said. And something about the way she said it, soft, final, made Isla's throat close. Henrietta knew she didn't have much time left. But today, she got to believe in something again. Later, back upstairs, Isla pulled the pins from her hair and let the curls fall loose, and she half expected Callum to retreat to his wing. But he stood at the edge of her doorway, silent. "You should rest," she said. "And should you?" She nodded. But neither of them moved. "Will you regret it?" she asked softly. "Every moment of it." He looked at her, and for once his expression cracked. "I regret that I didn't meet you under different terms." But then he left. That night, she sat in bed reading when the knock came. "Come in." Callum stepped inside, holding something small. A box. He placed it on her nightstand. "It's nothing extravagant," he muttered. "Just something you mentioned." She opened it carefully. Inside was a box of chalk pastels, the professional kind, the kind she'd once admired in a window and never let herself buy. Isla stared at them. "Because you look like someone who's always giving, and no one's ever handed you something back." She didn't say thank you. And she couldn't. The words stuck somewhere behind her ribs. But when he turned to leave, she reached out, barely brushing his wrist. He didn't flinch. Didn't step back. He just looked down at where her fingers touched his skin and let it happen. That night, she didn't sleep much. She sat by the window, drawing line after line until her fingers were dusted with color. Callum's face. Little Henrietta's eyes. A garden full of wildflowers no one had planted but somehow grew anyway. A house that wasn't home, but could be. Maybe, if she stayed long enough. If he let her. Chapter 4. Lies. There's a strange silence that comes after pretending for too long, the kind that settles not in your ears but under your skin. That's what Isla felt the morning after the fake wedding. She woke to the scent of bergamot tea and clean linen, sunlight spilling in like gold poured too fast. In the mirror, she didn't look like a bride. She looked like a girl caught between two worlds, one she'd borrowed and one she couldn't afford to lose. She stepped into the kitchen barefoot, her curls still damp from the hurried shower, and found Callum at the counter, sleeves rolled up, pouring her coffee. "You take it with almond milk, right?" She blinked. "You remembered." "I remember everything." He didn't smile when he said it, but something about the way he slid the mug across the counter like it was sacred made her pulse skip. That afternoon, they took new press photos as a couple. His PR team had been briefed. No press releases, no interviews, just enough pictures to plant the seed. In one shot, Isla stood inches from his shoulder, lips parted like a question she didn't dare ask. "Closer," the photographer instructed. "You're in love, remember?" She moved nearer. Oh, Callum didn't flinch. Not this time. His breath hitched. Her hand brushed his sleeve fabric to fabric. But she could feel the tremble beneath. Not from disgust. From fear. From wanting. From not knowing what this was, becoming. "We're getting too good at this," she murmured when they stepped aside for a break. Callum looked at her. "Maybe. Does it scare you?" Why easy it is to lie when it feels good." He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The pause between them was enough. That night, Henrietta called them to her room. She looked smaller somehow, than she had even just days before. "My heart's slowing," she said, as if it were weather. "Don't say that," Isla whispered. "Let me." Henrietta took Isla's hand, then Callum's. "You're the only thing I've waited on, my whole life. I wanted to see love come back to our family, and even if this isn't real." "It is," Isla said, before she could stop herself. Henrietta smiled. "Then let it stay real, even after I go." Later, in the hallway, Callum turned to her. "Why did you say it was real?" She didn't hesitate. Because for a second, it felt like it was. Now? Why am I not the man I used to be? And that scares me more The next day, Callum canceled a board meeting. He took her to the coast. No staff, no drivers, just them. They walked barefoot along the edge of the water, Isla's hem soaked in sea foam. He told her about how he built the company. I started in a basement. Everything back then smelled like printer ink and fear. But you were young. I was alone. Are you still? He looked out to sea. I'm trying not to be. She reached for his hand. And this time he didn't move away. They spent the evening at a roadside diner, grilled cheese and milkshakes between them. No suits. No contracts. Just two people who didn't know how to stop pretending, because the lie felt too safe to leave behind. And the truth? It would cost everything. Back at the penthouse, he walked her to her room. She opened the door. He didn't move. Okay, I want to come in. It wasn't an invitation. It was a question that carried 10,000 hidden ones beneath it. He looked at her for a long, long time. Then he shook his head. Tonight. But he didn't leave. Anna waited out. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. Slowly, gently, as if testing fate itself. Good night, Isla. Good night, Callum. She closed the door, pressed her back to it, let herself fall slowly to the floor. She wasn't supposed to fall for him. But the lies, the ones she told to get in, were starting to sound like prayers she wished were real. Chapter 5. The Woman He Used to Love. It started with a name. Just a single envelope left carelessly on Callum's desk, cream-colored, gold-inked, too elegant to be overlooked. Aga Westbury. Isla saw it by accident, while dropping off the coffee he'd forgotten to drink, and she wasn't trying to pry. But the name echoed. Familiar. Shark. Like a bell in a church you don't remember visiting but somehow know by sound. She didn't ask. Not at first. But later that night, after dinner, when Callum was unusually quiet, staring too long at the skyline, she found herself asking anyway. Who's Margot? His hand froze on his wine glass. Where did you hear that? It was on your desk. I didn't mean to see it. He didn't look angry. Just haunted. It was the last person I ever let close, he said after a long pause. Did she hurt you? No, Hall said quietly. I hurt her, but they were young. Callum, barely 25, was already being hailed as a prodigy in New York's tech scene. Margot was the daughter of an investor, sharp, beautiful, raised in the kind of world Callum had only observed from behind glass. She fell in love with his mind. He fell in love with the idea that someone like her could love someone like him. But Callum's world wasn't soft. He didn't know how to bend, to yield, to offer the kind of warmth she craved. When she asked him to choose the company or her, he didn't hesitate. I told her I'd regret losing the company more. I did you? Isla asked softly. He looked at her. Then, after a long silence, why I regret what that answer turned me into. The next morning, Isla visited Henrietta alone. The old woman looked worse. Paler, her voice thinner. We told you about Margot? She asked, almost amused. Isla blinked. I did you know. Because he hasn't touched that part of his soul in years. Not until you. Henrietta reached for her hand. Don't be afraid of the past, darling. It's not a threat. It's a mirror. Let it show you how far he's come. But Isla was afraid. Because the more she learned about Callum, the real Callum, the more her lies felt like poison in her mouth. She wasn't the girl he thought she was. Not a rising artist, not a trustable name. Just a desperate woman with a sick mother, borrowed clothes, and a contract that tied her to a man she loved. The word had crept in quietly. But it had rooted deep. Too deep. That evening, she found him alone in the study. The fire was low. Shadows danced across the hardwood floor like unspoken memories. "I lied to you," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "About what?" "A background? My resume? Even the first time we met, I wasn't supposed to be at that interview. I pretended to be someone else. It was a mistake. I was desperate." And silence thickened. He stood slowly and finally looked at her. "I knew." She blinked. "I knew that day you weren't who you claimed to be, but you looked me in the eye and didn't flinch. And I was tired of people pretending for money, for fame. You were pretending just to survive." "Why?" "Because it was the first time someone saw me without asking for anything in return. And I didn't care who you were. I cared how I felt around you." Tears blurred her vision. "I'm sorry." Then softly. "Huh? We don't leave." They didn't kiss. They didn't touch. But Isla sat beside him in the quiet, their shoulders close enough to feel each other breathe. She had told him the truth, and he'd chosen not to walk away. Maybe the past didn't have to define them. Maybe this house, his house, could finally hold something real. Chapter 6. When the touch no longer burns. For as long as he could remember, touch had meant danger. Not the kind that bruised skin, but the kind that left fingerprints on memory. Callum had spent decades controlling the chaos around him, the temperature, the lighting, the rhythm of his days. But not once had he been able to control what happened inside him when someone reached out their hand. Until now. Until her. It started with Isla falling asleep. And she hadn't meant to. One evening, long after dinner, she'd curled up on the couch in his library with her sketch pad and drifted off. Her soft breathing filled the room like music. Callum had found her there, knees tucked to chest, ink smudged across her wrist, the remains of a half-finished drawing of Henrietta's hands cradling a teacup. He stood frozen in the doorway. Something warm unspooled in his chest, something almost unfamiliar. He approached slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal. Then, against every instinct that had once governed him, he reached out. His fingers brushed hers. Nothing happened. No fire, no heat, no panic. Just peace. The next morning, Isla awoke in her bed, a blanket tucked around her she hadn't pulled up herself. And on her nightstand, a cup of warm tea. Chamomile, with a single vanilla wafer on the saucer. She stared at it for a long time. Callum Whitmore, the man who once flinched from a handshake, had touched her. And protected her. And hadn't run. The change was slow. Intentional. He started sitting closer at breakfast. Up checking his watch every 4 minutes. Stopped flinching when their elbows brushed beneath the table. One afternoon, he reached across the kitchen counter to dust powdered sugar from her cheek. His hand lingered. "You didn't pull away," she whispered. "Or did you?" They stayed like that, frozen in something too soft to be scripted, until Henrietta called from the other room. But not everything was easy. Some nights, he still paced, still kept the lights too bright, still stared at himself in the mirror, like he was afraid of becoming someone else. Isla watched him from the doorway once. "Are you afraid of?" she asked. He didn't turn around. "I'll touch you and want more." On the other, the wooden door. "Then it won't be pretend anymore. And I don't know how to survive that kind of real." A week later, the storm came. Literally. A power outage knocked out the lights, the heat, and the security systems. Henrietta was asleep upstairs. Isla lit candles in the hallway. Callum stood at the foot of the stairs, staring out the tall windows like the night itself unsettled him. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't like the dark. It's unpredictable." She reached out, held his hand. "Did he hold on to me?" He did. Tighter than she expected. They ended up in the library again, curled up together on the couch beneath a wool blanket, the fire crackling. Isla rested her head on his shoulder. He didn't move. Your heart's racing, she whispered. It always does when you're near. She looked up. Are you afraid? But for once, I don't want to be. And then slowly, reverently, he tilted her face toward his. Paul asked with his eyes. She nodded. And when he kissed her, it didn't feel like the breaking of a rule. It felt like the beginning of a life. Afterward, they said nothing, just sat there, hand clasped, with quiet, as if the moment would shatter if they acknowledged it too loudly. But Isla knew. There was no going back now, because this wasn't the story she'd been hired into. It wasn't the contract she'd signed. This was something that breathed, that hurt, that healed. And soon, something was going to break. Not because of love, but because of how long they'd tried to pretend it wasn't there. Chapter 7. The Truth That Finds Us. They had built a castle out of make-believe. But castles made of sand, even the most beautiful ones, always collapse when the tide returns. For Isla, the tide came in the form of a phone call. She had just returned from the flower market, arms full of tulips Henrietta loved, when her phone buzzed. No number. She almost didn't answer. But something, maybe fate, maybe guilt, made her swipe anyway. Miss Merrick, a clipped voice said, "This is Chelsea Beckett from West Side Medical. I'm calling about your mother." Isla's heart stuttered. Why happened? Her condition has worsened. We'll need to reschedule surgery. But the pause that followed was the kind that steals oxygen. You listed an insurance sponsor, but the company's legal department reached out. They said the sponsorship is invalid. Isla blinked, stunned. No, that's not possible. The Whitmore Foundation signed off. I submitted the letter. We reviewed it. The signature was forged. She stood in the kitchen for a long time, phone pressed to her chest, unable to breathe. She hadn't forged anything. But she knew who might have. Evelyn. The woman who had arranged the interview, the same you who had never liked Isla. The one who promised her the contract would take care of everything. Isla's hand shook. Everything, the safety net beneath her, her mother's treatment, the quiet peace of this borrowed life, began to crumble. That evening, she found Callum in his study. He was reading, glasses low on his nose, looking too much like someone who trusted her. It hurt to look at him. We need to talk, she said. He closed the book. Listened. And as Isla told him about the call, the forged papers, her mother's real condition, she expected the worst. Expected his jaw to harden, expected the cold silence he used like armor. Instead, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard. But why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't want to lose you. You were never mine to lose. Her chest broke a little. Well, I was, she said. Maybe not at first, but I am now. The next day, Callum called an emergency board meeting. Not about profits. About people. He confronted Evelyn publicly. Produced evidence, emails, timelines, a forged document. You used my foundation to manipulate a woman into saving my family name, he said coldly. You used my grandmother's illness, my reputation, my silence. Olivian didn't deny it, and she just stared. You were changing, she said, bitter, and I couldn't let her break you. She didn't break me, Callum replied. She's the only reason I'm whole. He fired her on the spot, then walked out, not like a CEO, but like a man finally ready to choose something other than power. He found Isla in the greenhouse. She was sitting cross-legged on the ground, dirt under her nails, tears on her cheeks. He knelt beside her. I fixed what I could, he said, but I can't fix what I did to you by letting this happen. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. Why did you even want someone like me? Because you were real. Because you made me want more than silence. He pulled something from his coat pocket. Not a ring. A folded piece of notebook paper, soft, creased, written in ink. "You left this in the library, the first week you moved in, a sketch of my grandmother's hands, and a note that said, 'I want to remember her as warmth.' I read it every night." Her voice broke. "Colin, I'm not good with feelings, but I know this. You are the only truth I've ever let in." He held out his hand. "Says one, I'll walk you to the door myself, but if you want to stay, Isla, I swear, this time we do it for real." And she didn't speak. She just leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his, and let him hold her. No contract. No pretense. Just two people with nothing left to lie about. And finally, nothing left to hide. Chapter 8. Loving Someone Who's Leaving. The tulips on Henrietta's windowsill had begun to wilt. So had her voice. So had time. She slept more now, ate less, smiled only when Callum or Isla brought her tea in her favorite porcelain cup, the one with the blue forget-me's. "I know what's coming," she whispered to Isla one morning, her hand a soft tremble over Isla's wrist. "But it's okay. I've been waiting to see this." "See what?" "Learning to love." Isla fought the tears. "You always could." "Nobody has," Henrietta said, a soft laugh that ended in a cough. "He always wanted to. That's different." Callum stayed by her side more often now. No more boardrooms. And no more endless meetings. He canceled a deal with a German investor that would have made headlines. "It'll wait," he said. But Isla knew. He wasn't talking about business. He was talking about her. About Henrietta. About the fragile bubble they were all living in, and the quiet dread they didn't dare name. One night, when the house was silent except for the hum of the night air, Isla found him sitting at the foot of his grandmother's bed. Henrietta was asleep. Colin was not. He was staring at her, a boy again, the weight of every missed moment crushing him. "She raised me," he whispered. "After my mother left, after my father stopped caring, she gave me rules, structure, but more than anything, she gave me a reason to be better." Sala sat beside him. "You are." "Not yet," he said, "but I'm trying." They didn't touch that night. They didn't need to. Just breathing the same air was intimacy enough. The next morning, Henrietta woke early. Asked for hot cocoa instead of tea. Asked to be dressed in her blue cashmere. "I want to feel pretty one more time," she said. Isla brushed her hair. Carden buttoned her cardigan. She looked at them both, eyes glassy with something ancient and full. "You too," she said. "Don't waste your life waiting for permission to..." She made them promise quietly, tearfully, that no matter what happened, they wouldn't walk away from this. From each other. At dusk, she fell asleep again. And this time, didn't wake. The world didn't end with sirens. Or screams. It ended with silence. With the slow unfurling of a hand once held tight. With Callum, still as stone, sitting beside her for hours not speaking. With Isla, curling against the doorway, tears sliding down her throat like prayers. The funeral was small. Private. Exactly how Henrietta would have wanted. The tulips were fresh. The forget-me-not cup held a single candle. And Callum stood at the front, his voice breaking only once. "Susie once told me that loving someone is like handing them a map to every soft part of you and trusting they won't burn it." I gave her that map. "I want to give it to you now too," he said, eyes meeting Isla's across the pews. Afterward, they returned to the house. It felt different, quieter, but not hollow. Because love had once lived there, and left behind its scent. Isla found Callum in the greenhouse. He was watering the new tulips, the ones she planted in Henrietta's memory. He turned when he heard her steps. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Of what?" You'll leave now, but now that the reason you came is gone, you'll go too. She stepped closer. You were never the reason I stayed because of... Then why? Because in all the noise of my life, you became the one thing that felt like home. He dropped the watering can, took her face in his hands, and kissed her like it was the first time. Because in many ways, it was. They had loved someone who was leaving. Now they had to learn how to stay together. Chapter 9. A Love That Lives Without Contract. The first Monday after the funeral, Callum stood at the head of the boardroom table and ripped up the contract. Not just the fake relationship one. All of them. From this point forward, he announced, our company doesn't deal in power plays or performance. We deal in purpose. Ding-dong, people. His executive stared, stunned. The man once called the ICE CEO famous for silence, feared for precision, was now speaking with warmth. And Isla? She stood by the glass wall outside the boardroom, watching him from a distance and smiling through her tears. Because the man she had helped unfreeze was beginning to thaw the world around him. That night, over a modest dinner of buttered salmon and wine, Callum handed her a velvet envelope. She blinked. What's this? Their final paycheck. But she opened it. It was blank. You forgot the amount. He said, you get to write it, for everything you gave me that wasn't part of the deal. She stared at him. I call him. You're free now. There's no contract keeping you here. He hesitated. If you still want to stay, I'll spend the rest of my life earning that. Freedom, she realized, isn't always a door. Sometimes it's a question. And in that moment, Islam knew. She didn't want to leave. Not because she had nowhere to go, but because she had finally found somewhere she didn't want to leave behind. In the days that followed, they began to build something new. No assistants. No paparazzi. Just routines made of joy. She planted fresh lavender along the garden fence. He learned how to brew her favorite lemon ginger tea. They painted the old guest bedroom together, turned it into a studio. And every night, Callum would sit on the floor beside her while she sketched, asking questions like a curious child rediscovering the world. But love without contracts also meant honesty. One evening, Isla told him about her real past. The debt, the scholarships, the days she skipped meals so her mother could afford medication. She held her breath when she finished. He simply took her hand. You survived all of that, and you still chose kindness? I didn't always. You did with me. One morning, she woke to an empty bed and a note on her pillow. Meet me where the sky meets the lake. Confused, she followed the path behind the house, past the willow trees and down to the small private dock Callum's grandmother used to sit on. He was waiting, dressed in jeans and a navy sweater. No suit, no pressure. Just him. He knelt, not with a ring, but with a locket. Inside was a tiny sketch Isla had drawn of Henrietta's hands holding a teacup, the very first one he'd found. On the back, you were the one who made me feel. Will you stay? He asked. Not because of a signature, but because you want to. She nodded, crying. Then marry me. Not for the press, not for a dying wish, just for us. They didn't rush. There was no $1 million venue, just a sunrise ceremony by the lake. A dress Isla stitched herself. Small group of friends, no cameras. Callum whispered his vows while holding her trembling hands. I used to think love was something earned, controlled, contained, but you showed me love isn't a cage, it's a key. You're my home, Isla Merrick, my truth? And when he kissed her, the sun rose behind them, as if the world itself had waited for this moment to begin again. Chapter 10. The Family We Choose. The old Whitmore house didn't feel haunted anymore. Not by silence, not by fear, and not by the weight of all the things left unsaid. It had changed. So had they. 3 months after their wedding, Isla stood barefoot in the garden Henrietta once kept. She pressed her palms to her growing belly, the curve still barely visible, but enough for Callum to kiss each morning as if it were holy. "Little girl," she whispered aloud, as if saying it would make it real. "Or a little boy who sketches stars and asks too many questions," Callum replied behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She laughed, tears in her eyes. "Either way, I hope they inherit your courage. I hope they inherit your fire." Henrietta's room remained untouched, but not clothed. They had turned it into a reading lounge. Books everywhere. A candle, always lit in the evening, and a note framed on the wall. "I love finds you in a storm. Don't hide from the rain, dance in it." One morning, Isla found an envelope by her easel. Inside was a deed to a small art studio downtown. "Yours," Callum said when she looked at him. "I want the world to see what I've been lucky enough to live beside." And she started crying. He kissed her hair. "This isn't a gift," he whispered. "It's a thank you." What? "I saving me. Not from loneliness, but from living without color." The world noticed the change. Whitmore Enterprises began sponsoring. Medical bills for local patients were paid anonymously. A community garden was built behind City Hall in honor of Henrietta. The board called him foolish. Callum didn't care. "Profit is good," he told them, "but legacy is better." When the baby came, it was storming again. The sky cracked with thunder. But inside the birthing room, there was only light. Little girl. Red hair, her mother's eyes. They named her Henley Grace Whitmore, after strength, after hope, after a woman who once taught a boy to believe in tenderness. Callum held her like glass and wept openly. "And she's everything I never knew I needed," he said. "She's everything we fought to deserve," Isla replied. That winter, they hosted a quiet gathering at the lake. No speeches, just candles. One for Henrietta. One for Isla's mother, now cancer-free. And one for every moment they thought love was something that had to be earned. Callum stood behind Isla, Henley asleep in her arms. He looked around at the quiet, flickering circle of light. "This is our family now. The one we were born into," Islan said softly, "but the one we built." The wind rustled the trees, and somewhere between the stars and the silence, it felt like Henrietta was smiling. Things stole again. Still, she stayed. They say real love doesn't shout. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need a crowd. Real love whispers, in half-empty rooms, in quiet teacups, in the steady way someone memorizes your habits, not because they have to, but because they want to. Callum Whitmore, the man once known for precision and power, had learned to love without rules. Not because of a contract, not because of obligation, but because one woman walked into his silence and stayed. Not every story ends with fireworks. Some end with lavender in the garden, a baby's breath on your shoulder, and someone you trust to hold the fragile parts of you without breaking them. In Isla Merrick's life, there had been storms. Loneliness. The ache of pretending to be strong when all she wanted was to be held. But she'd learned this, that love doesn't always come wrapped in romance. Sometimes it comes disguised as a cold man with a warm soul, afraid to be seen. And sometimes, if you stay long enough, even the most guarded hearts will bloom. So here's the truth. Love doesn't save us. It invites us to save ourselves. Bit by bit, hand in hand. Until one day, you wake up beside someone who knows the shape of your scars, and kisses them anyway. What about you? Have you ever loved someone who was afraid to love you back? Have you ever stayed not because you had to, but because your heart wouldn't let you go? If you've ever fought for real love in a world that rewards the fake, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments, not for likes, not for attention, just for the ones who need to hear that true love still exists. Because sometimes, a stranger's story is exactly the reminder someone else needs to believe again.